Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you for joining me once again for one of these Magic the Gathering openings. This time around, we're going into a secret lair that had come out a bit surprisingly because I wasn't really expecting it to show up at this rate, but it's going to be a little bit of another Dungeons and Dragons crossover. Now we have gotten the Forgotten Realms back in maybe it was 2020 or so. Somewhere around there, we had the Battle for Baldur's Gate set that came out, a year or two after that, and we had a secret lair that came out maybe in 2024 would be my best guess, but it had Karlach and Asterion in it, and so it was just a bit weird. I guess, maybe they were some of the most popular characters, so it would kind of make sense. And this time around, actually, there's going to be a Shadowheart and a Gale that are going to show up. So maybe they're going to go through and every year or two put out another Baldur's Gate 3 companion that they think is going to sell pretty well, because I would assume that if they've got Shadowheart and Karlach, that Lizelle might be in. And I mean, I know a few people that are interested in her. Other male characters, I mean, there's Will, there's... I haven't played it yet, so, I'm guessing at these characters' names. I think it was Halsim or something like that, but, there's certain characters that I think are more popular than others, which will bring them up, because I think that there are more popular female characters than there are some of the male characters, but we'll have to see. But we are going to get into this because this is our third, I think, Dungeons and Dragons crossover with Secret Lair, and I want to take a look into these, add these into the collection there. So why don't you come and join me? No bonus card that came with these. I know sometimes when we have these secret lairs, they're like, spend this much and you get an extra card on it. And this one didn't have it like the, like we saw with the Fallout cards. But we're going to just start off with the lands because those ones are pretty basic. Haha, get it? Basic lands. And just kind of get those out of the way because, I mean, they're just going to mostly be seen for, hey, they won't be much in terms of, the value, and we all know what basic lands do. So we're just going to start off with those. Okay, so we are going to get on in. I think that each of these has 2 of each type of land, if I remember correctly, which, makes it a little bit easier because we get to, see them and potentially put them in multiple decks, or, we can put more of the same land in the same deck there. But starting off, we are going to have our plains, which I don't exactly know where each of these are, but I'm actually going to swap these around, have the foil in my left hand. I think that I usually do that there. But yeah, so we got our plains, which has some sort of Atlas, Colossal, like Colossus of Rhodes, that is in the background there of this castle keep reaching up to some sort of sphere. And I mean, it's very pretty. I mean, it definitely has, the whitewashed walls of a castle, which makes sense for the plains, and has a couple of griffins that are in the air. 3 of them, it looks like, one in the foreground, one in the midground, one in the background. They are all with knights on them. The sphere is suspended from the hand, probably with some sort of levitation magic or something going on. I could even imagine that statue coming to life and just being a guardian as kind of like a last line of defense. But yeah, looks pretty nice. We do get 2... I thought we got 2 of them. Maybe it'll just show up a little bit later there, but we're going to look at the island next here. And it looks a little bit more swampy type of island, so a little bit darker island there. So maybe good with like a Dimir deck or so, because it's very close to the ground. It looks like it might be in a cave, as we see on the right-hand side. There's like a shaft of light that's shining through, so it makes me feel like, you know, this is in some sort of cave. So not really dwarven architecture, I would say. I don't exactly know what drow architecture would look like, but I could see this being closer to drow or Triton, though I think Tritons probably live closer, like underwater rather than like above water like this. But still a nice one there. I like the plains a bit better than this one, but you know, I'll still certainly take new stuff. Up next, we're going to have our swamps, which this one definitely looks like the Underdark. Got a lot of mushrooms, bioluminescence in there. The background that we see in the cave, it's probably not actual light that's pouring through. It's probably just to be able to give this some depth. Or if it is, you know, that's the entrance is that way. And, you know, the further that you get in, the darker it's going to get. But cave atmosphere 100%. And I dig it, especially with the glowing mushrooms, because you got to just try a little bit of the glowing mushrooms, even if it kills you, right? So up next, we're going to have our mountains, and it looks, let's see here, a little bit of built into the mountain there, as we can see kind of around here. There's like another entrance or walkway that's there. Palatial up on the top, and a city on a smaller portion of the cliffs. You know, you have your castle up on top, and it looks like there's even like castle architecture in the back here. You have your castle up on higher ground. It's harder for the enemy to attack it there. They can't really come at this angle. A lot of that water will have made that sort of terrain very impassable, and having the town or city at a lower level from the palace or the garrison makes it harder for them to get up there, you know, different levels on it. So I think that it's a very good direction in terms of a military structure, and building on a mountain cliff makes sense. And lastly, we've got our forest, which looks like the entrance to one of our creepy caves just out in the middle of the forest here. Gives a little bit of a Howling Mine vibe to it as well. So maybe if I played a green deck that had Howling Mine in it, I'd want to include this one in, or make like a cave deck, just, you know, a deck that is based around caves. And sure, you know, you could put the cave land type in there, but this seems just, you know, another really good one. I think I like this one second to the plains. I think it's just really interesting that there's some sort of story behind it. The island is probably my least favorite, just because it's a little bit dark, can't really see as much detail in it, and the other ones I think are just a bit better. But I think here, yep, we are going to double up on our lands, plains, island, swamp, mountain, and another forest. And I believe that the next card in here is going to be the same for both. And yep, it's going to be a reliquary tower. Looks like it could potentially be another view of the plains from a different angle, one where you can't exactly see that Colossus. It could very well, and it probably is, just an entirely different location, though, you know, the things that we see in the background here look large. You know, they're small here, but comparatively to what this structure is like, they're probably big, so they could be griffins. And, you know, we did see griffins in the original plains there. So I believe, at least in my headcanon, that it's probably the same place. And, you know, it's always nice to get another reliquary tower. I like running them, especially in the decks that you get a lot of cards in. And hey, you know, talking about the Howling Mind, if you've got a deck that gives you a lot of cards that you draw, like in Howling Mind, sure, you know, probably reliquary tower is something that you're going to want to put into it as well. But with that one finished up, we are going to head right on into our first character, which is going to be Gale here. Now, unfortunately, when I had previewed the cards that were going to be in Gale's. One with the Weave. I'm sure that's what Gale is. I don't believe that Gale actually had a lot of interesting cards within his stuff. Like, we'll definitely look at them and review them and see what they've got, but I think in terms of getting them in other places, they've already been reprinted a lot, or they're not necessarily amazing, so you know, they're not necessarily expensive to be able to get. So, you know, mostly these are just going to be for the collection, and if I do use the cards, well, you know, I can look at blinging up the deck if I really wanted to. So starting off, we've got a little bit of the titular character himself, Gale, Waterdeep Prodigy. 2 and a blue for a 1/3 legendary human wizard with, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may cast up to 1 target card of the other type from your graveyard. If a spell cast from your graveyard this way would be put into your graveyard, exile instead. So it essentially gives it an instant or sorcery in your graveyard, flashback. Sometimes the flashback cost is more, sometimes it's less, but I think most of the time it's more, so keeping it about the same is nice, but you've got to plan things accordingly of if you want to cast that sorcery, you have to cast an instant, and then it kind of makes it a little bit weird because you can't necessarily cast a sorcery from your graveyard on an opponent's turn at flash speed unless you've got something like the Dalkin Orrery out there. But it's possible. I can see how it would be played. You know, you want to get an even mixture-ish of sorceries and instants so that you can get some to the graveyard, play one so you can get the other. But, you know, playing the one from the graveyard is not for free, so you have to have all of the extra mana for it, which becomes a little bit of the problem, I guess, with it. Choose a background. If this is your commander, then you can have a background which is kind of like a job almost, like hermit or passionate archaeologist, something that kind of gives it a little bit of extra flavor to it. But for Gale here, you know, we've got him holding out his hand, offering out to help us, and well, when I say I didn't play Baldur's Gate 3, it was more that I didn't have time to really go through a whole lot of it, so I did get through a portion of the first act, and I do know, at least if I remember correctly, that this sigil in the background here for Gale is the one that he gets stuck in so that he doesn't fall to his death at the very beginning. So, you know, interesting little one here for us. I do think Gale would be interesting to make for a more low-powered deck, but, you know, we'll see how it goes. Next up, we get a little Arcane Denial, a little counter spell, which looks like he's having some sort of trouble. Maybe he's it's just a little bit of heartburn, right? Though I guess, no, Karlach has more of the heartburn in a literal sense, so medical heartburn. Arcane Denial, 1 and a blue, instant counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and then you, the controller of this card, draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, so you replace it. So you're essentially giving the opponent 2 cards in exchange for something that they played, so 2 cards is a good amount, so I would say it's more of a use it on something that you think is going to be impactful, because 2 cards is a hefty penalty to play, but still a decent one, you know, good to put in there. Another cheap counter spell, Archmage's Charm. Now I do know that Gale has some sort of connection with like the god of magic, or becomes the god of magic, something along those lines, so I imagine that this is more of his ethereal godly form. Triple blue for an instant that you choose one of 3. You either counter target spell, you have target player draw 2 cards, or you gain control of target non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. Used to be a very impactful card, but as things get printed, there's more and more power creep that happens, so unfortunately, it just isn't quite as good as it was, and the modes are decent. Again, 2 blue, you get generic counterspell. Drawing 2 for 3, that's about what you get for divination, except the divination is 2 in a blue, so, it's not as restrictive. And gaining control of the non-land permanent, it's a little bit harder to say, but I guess, the extra blue or the extra restrictiveness is more of giving you the options of whatever it is that you want to play. But, we'll take another version of that. I think that it's its first secret lair printing, alternate art printing maybe. Brainstorm, one that we use a whole lot, so I will absolutely take more versions of this. I really like the Splinter one in the bonus sheets of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so I will absolutely take another Brainstorm here. 1 blue for an instant. Draw 3 cards, and then you put 2 cards from your hand on the top of the library in any order. Does not have to be the cards involved in the draw. So if you've got a couple of dead cards in your hand and have a way to shuffle your deck, well, you got rid of them. You don't need them anymore. So that's nice. And our last regular one before the bonus card is going to be Personal Tutor, which I'm trying to remember if this was an old one from the Portal 3 Kingdoms era, but it's going to be 1 in a blue for and sorcery, where you search your library for a sorcery card, reveal it, shuffle, and then put that card on the top. So maybe the sorcery is your game ender and you're just bringing it up with this. That's probably what I would end up using it for. Just because it is the 1 mana, make it nice. Looks like Gale is just twiddling his fingers, casting a little spell, adding into this Aurora Borealis of magic that's happening. Honestly, a very beautiful sight. I wish that it was a little bit more rainbow within the Aurora Borealis itself instead of just kind of monochromatic. But, it is what it is. And our final card is going to be Secrets of the Dead, which looks like some sort of Necronomicon, and it's got some sort of jewel that he's got to put into the mouth to be able to make it speak or something like that. 2 in a blue for an enchantment with whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, you draw a card. So goes incredibly well with Gale. So kind of makes sense that it is here because, with all of these, you want to have them do certain things. We've got sorcery for Personal Tutor, Brainstorm is an instant, Archmage's Charm is an instant, Arcane Denial is an instant. So, but Personal Tutor does get us another sorcery as well. But I think that this is just a card that you kind of need to have with a Gale deck because you get an extra card for playing the ones that you already did from your graveyard. It just makes sense. And it's a creepy one. Who knows? Maybe Gale is a creep. I haven't played the game, so I wouldn't exactly know. But that's kind of what I'm getting from it here with that whole undead book. You know what? We're going to put Gale up here and the lands beneath so that we can put Shadowheart right next to him. And it won't be weird to have 1 and then 2 here. You gotta think with your head on these things. You can't cast a shadow without some light. I imagine that Shadowheart is, has something to do with darkness, as Archie is called the Dark Justiciar. But yeah, I can imagine, you can't have darkness without light. You can't have light without darkness. The absence of one negates the other. And, in order to cast shadow, you do need light, or it does get just swallowed up in the darkness. Okay, so starting off with our titular card for Shadowheart, as we said, Shadowheart Dark Justiciar. 3 in a black for a 3/4 legendary human elf cleric with 1 in a black, tap, sack another creature, draw X cards where X is that creature's power. Choose a background. So you could go in, attack with something, and if you think it's going to die, you can tap this and sack the creature so that you get the card draw instead, or You know, you play a little bit more of the defensive, you block with a creature, and then instead of having it die to combat damage, you're like, oh, you know, I'm going to sacrifice it for cards instead. Shadows will not consume me. I am shielded by Lady Shar. I don't exactly know who Shar is. I think that she is another deity. Shadowheart has her little bobble in her hand there. Some sort of stuff going on in the background. I don't know if that's has to do with any of the what are they called? The cephalopoid head-looking guys. I'm not going to remember their names, but the main antagonists to those, the mind flayers, that's what it is. So I imagine it has something to do with mind flayers in the background there. But yeah, I know Shadowheart is a very popular character, and she's definitely showing up in a power pose here. Gale is more showing off friendly vibes in his, Shadowheart showing off more power and danger in hers. Next up, we're going to get Beseech the Queen. So I imagine that she gets into some form of power in here. Triple 2 black hybrid for a sorcery with search your library for a card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control. Reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Okay, so you get a lot of lands out. If you are playing green and black, you can play a lot of elves, get a lot of ramp going on so that you can be able to search for the card that you want. You know, that could happen. We've got the people bowing down to her. You know, makes really sense with that Beseech the Queen. Yeah, we'll take that one. Up next, we're going to get a little bit of Black Market. So yeah, it does look like she's delving and dealing in, you know, some of the shadier businesses. 3 and double black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, you put a charge counter on this enchantment. At the beginning of your main phase, add black for each charge counter on this enchantment. So it's whenever a creature dies, not just yours, so opponent's yours, so you can play an aristocrat strategy, maybe some sort of reciprocal effects like with Fleshbag Marauder, where, you know, when it enters, you sack a creature, and then each opponent also sacrifices a creature. Get a whole lot of value on black market with that. Get a lot of extra black mana. Yeah, I would certainly appreciate that. Next up, we got a little bit of Victimize. I guess I don't really see... I see chains in the background that look like they're holding maybe islands of land together. So maybe Shadowheart is bringing this spear down on some unlucky combatant that she has felled, or something along those lines. 2 and a black for a sorcery. Choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard. Sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to your battlefield tapped. So essentially reviving 2 creatures for 3 mana, and then also getting the sacrifice trigger that you want on another, you know, really helps into that strategy. I would have imagined... I always imagine that Victimize sounds like something that would destroy one of your opponent's creatures or something. But, you know, I think that this goes into her aristocrat strategy well. And surprisingly, a green creature, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because the whole rest of the thing is black. And it's a little bit out of place. So I would hope that this has to do with some sort of lore in Shadowheart's backstory, because otherwise it's a little bit of a flavor fail. Ancient Bronze Dragon, 5 and double green for a 7/7 Elder Dragon with flying. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20. When you do, put X +1/+1 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures, where X is the result. You know, it's one of the 5 Elder Dragons that you roll a die and you get something based off of it. I've gotten some of these bronze dragons. I've gotten gold dragons and silver dragons. I still have not gotten a brass or a copper ancient dragon yet. So I'm still going to be on the lookout for those, and it just stinks where it's like, okay, you know, these are the first reprinting of these, but I think only Copper Dragon has been reprinted, but it was reprinted as a bonus card in the Final Fantasy sets, and, you know, hard to get that one along with Ristic Study. So having this be one where you can actually potentially get it, you know, it's nice being able to have another version of this, and it looks very intimidating. You know, it's rising up from the ground, going off to potentially try to decimate Shadowheart, but I'm sure for lore reasons that she ends up beating it. And our final bonus card is going to be Pride of the Perfect. I think that the perfects being from the Lorwyn blocks that we've seen recently. So, you know, helping out the elves is nice. 3 and a black enchantment. Elves you control get +2/+0. And it looks like, unlike Gale and some of the other ones, that this is more of a intimate moment with Shadowheart. With this whole, you didn't have to wait until I was in the water to hold me. Come here. I'm trying to see with her hands if she's trying to like hold one out, because it looks like she's like covering up one of her arms with one of her hands. I imagine that she's got her hand held out for you to join her there, you know, have some sort of intimate moment. I find it very funny. It's just like the water is shiny, and then when you get the shiny right, you're like, oh, her face doesn't shine, and it kind of just feels a little bit weird there. But, you know, I think that it also makes sense with how it's, you know, the water is reflecting things. But yeah, you know, nifty little set. Definitely the Ancient Bronze Dragon was a very nice surprise in that. You know, the black market as well. You know, it's a nifty little one that I don't think has a ton of reprints in it. I think the only one that I have it in is one of the commander decks that had come out. But we're going to be going on into our next one, which is going to be Strahd's Descent, which I imagine is some sort of vampire that is in Baldur's Gate, maybe. Beyond the mists, into the valley, to a prison eternal and dark. Because, you know, I'm sure that there's all different kinds of villains and creatures that show up in Baldur's Gate 3 that you can fight. And, you know, Asterion is a vampire, so, you know, maybe this is the vampire that cursed Asterion. Who knows? I don't. You could let me know if it is. So first off, we're going to start with the Devil Strahd himself. So the titular character of this one as well. It looks like we're starting off with those in these last 3. So he is going to be a copy of Streffen, Mauer Progenitor. So I think that was a Crimson Vow vampire. So maybe that's one of the vampire families. 2, a black and a red for a 3/2 legendary vampire noble with flying. At the beginning of your end step, create a blood token for each player who lost life this turn, including yourself. So if you lose life yourself, that's good. Whenever the Devil Strahd attacks, you may sacrifice 2 blood tokens. If you do, you may put a vampire from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end turn. Now that's a nifty little effect there. Sacrifice 2 blood tokens, and you can potentially put a big vampire out there and potentially doing it ahead of curve. Well, that's very nice. I definitely see how he could be very good. I mean, you know, use him as a commander himself, or, you know, get good old Edgar Markov out there and just have this one in the 99 so that you'll be able to play out a vampire and you get more vampires for your vampire. But this one, you want to have a little bit more blood tokens. And, I mean, as long as people have lost life, that's what matters. And I'm sure that you can find a way to either get a reciprocal effect or just make it so that, you know, everybody gets pinged for 1 when something happens or whatnot there. You know, I think that's a nifty little one, both in the 99 and as a commander. And I think this is the big one here that I was thinking would carry most of the value for this particular one. Cast Off Consort, which is going to be a Bloodletter of Alcazats, which I believe is going to be the first reprint of it. 1 and triple black for a 2/4 vampire demon with flying, and if an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much life instead. Ooh boy. Now it's only during your turn, so if an opponent gets attacked by another opponent, they don't lose double the life. But if you've got a way to ping people, you ping them down double the amount. If for whatever reason, you attack into somebody and they take combat damage, it doubles on that as well. So, a nifty little one there, and it looks like we've got some sort of ghostly, ghastly, ghouly vampire that was a bride. I'm getting that from the consort. Yes, Run, he likes to see me play with my food. So, yeah, I would imagine this is some sort of victim of the Devil Strahd, who essentially attacks anybody that comes into their castle. I imagine that he's in a castle. But yeah, good to get another version of these. I do believe I have some from the Ixalan block that it came in, but more is always good. And we're also going to get End the Festivities, also from that era of the, what would you call it? The Crimson Vow, Midnight Hunt. I think this would be more Midnight Hunt, like the conclusion of that story. End the Festivities, and we've got the Devil Strahd taking a big munch out of someone's neck there. 1 red for a sorcery. End of the Festivities deals 1 damage to each opponent, each creature and planeswalker they control. Here's the little ping that I was talking about. Ping everybody, you get the blood tokens. You can use the blood tokens to be able to get your extra vampires out. So, yeah, that's kind of what it is, just a little pinger that you can do. You put it on, if you can get an Isochron Scepter and exile this onto Isochron Scepter, well, you can do that ping every turn and make sure that you get all those extra blood tokens. And lastly, we're going to get Castle Ravenloft. I'm trying to remember if Ravenloft was one of like the D&D books or something like that, but it's going to be a copy of Voldaren Estate, which is going to be a land that taps for a colorless, or you can tap it to pay 1 life and add 1 mana of any color, but only spend it on vampire spells. You can also pay 5 and tap this to create a blood token, but this costs 1 less to activate for each vampire you control. So if you've got a lot of vampires on your field, especially if you've got something like Edgar Markov, for instance, that every time you play a vampire, you get a little vampy token, potentially just tapping this for the blood tokens to help Devil Strahd is really nice. And yeah, a little evil castle that we see there, kind of reminiscent of a Dracula-like castle. Makes sense to me. Final bonus card is going to be Bloody Betrayal. Maybe this is the, what do you call this? Maybe this is the consort that we saw earlier who... the cast-off consort, because she's wearing a little bit of a bridal veil. And she's got longish fingers like that one did, so kind of makes a little bit of sense. And it's got that sort of like classic horror monster, from early on before like special effects were done by computers, and it was just trying to figure out the best way of capturing that terror. But 2 and a red for sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap it, it gains haste until end of turn, and you create a blood token. So, yep, creating more blood tokens, taking your opponent's stuff, which can make sure that they're open to attacks, or you're dealing extra damage to a different person there. Makes sense. Strahd sought to steal Tatiana's heart, and doing so shattered it. It got immortal and decided to take, make her his bride and then turned her into a vampire. That is my guess for what happened. But a little bit of a smaller one here. It only had 4 cards in the bonus one. But, like I said, I think that this cast-off consort is really doing the heavy lifting on a lot of those. Though, if I am correct in this, Streffen is a commander from that Crimson Vow, maybe it's the first time that it's getting reprinted. And speaking of reprints, we've got this guy right here, who, at the current moment, I do not have that deck, Tales from the Lower City. So being able to get him here is very nice, at least for the interim. And I do plan on getting some of the older decks and opening them up and reviewing them, especially with how new ones are going. But I'm only going to be getting the ones that I don't have. So which ones do I not have? Well, you'll have to see in the future now, won't you? But yes, this was a deck that came around the time that I was taking a little break from Magic. So I didn't quite get all of the Commander decks, especially since Commander decks were coming out at a much faster rate. So starting off, we got a little bit of Grim Hireling, which is going to be another interesting one to get more copies of because it hasn't had a lot of printings. It's going to be 3 and a black for a 3/2 Tiefling Rogue with whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you create 2 treasure tokens. Oh my, that's really nice. And that's to a player, so it's if you have 3 of your creatures attacking one player and they get through and deal damage, you still only get the 2 treasures. However, if you attack all 3 of your opponents and you hit all 3, you end up getting 6 treasure tokens, which is very, very nice. And you can pay 1 black and sacrifice X treasures to have target creature get -X/-6 until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So you take all of those treasures and you can either use them for mana or you can get rid of some of them and just essentially remove a creature. Gets around indestructible. The only thing it doesn't is like ward and hexproof, shroud, that sort of things. But, you know, a little bit of removal by just using treasures is pretty darn good, which is why the card was very heavily sought after. And in this case here, we have a rogue wearing, I guess, some leather gear, throwing down some bombs to blow up a couple of goblins who are super surprised by the attack. But this doesn't look like a goblin town per se, so maybe they're hiring this guy to get rid of goblins that are attacking the town. That would be my guess. This calls for a little redistribution of wealth. And next one is going to be a little Wild Magic Sorcerer. Another very interesting one here. 3 and a red for a 4/3 Orc Shaman Sorcery with the first spell you cast from exile each turn has Cascade, which is very nice and gives me a lot of ideas for this. I do have a couple of decks that deal with casting things from exile, so I want to be able to add one of these to that deck. So this is I'm glad that it gave me that inspiration to be able to do it. I warned you, even I don't know what I'm capable of. Yep, he's just burning a guy alive that may well have been his teammate. That's disappointing. Everybody's trying to protect themselves from the flames that he's just suddenly shooting out of his hands. Okay, up next we've got Zorn. A very interesting looking guy. Super, super comfortable. Look at him. He's just like got his arm up on an armrest of this chair made out of like gems and rock, propping his other arm up on his leg, and he's just letting the other leg dangle down. Yeah, he's really just having the time of his life here. 2 and a red for a 3/2 elemental. If you would create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. Wow, must be really good with that Grim Hireling that you get 2 tokens. So again, like the one thing I really like about these secret lairs is they try to make them all go together. Whether it's, the Cascade is just good in general. But yeah, like getting some extra treasures whenever you do it. Get a little bit of Academy Manufacturer as well. Yeah, now that's going to be good. Get a lot of tokens. And the card from the deck that I need himself, Prosper Tomebound. A little guy that has a lot of indestructible chains that are chained up to the book in front of him. So, I don't know why he's bound to this tome, but it gives them a lot of good stuff. 2 and a black and a red for a 1/4 legendary tiefling warlock with death touch. So good for keeping on defense since he's got a big old butt and got the death touch. And all he needs to do is just do that one little ping of damage and guy died. He's got two other abilities. Mystic Arcanum. At the beginning of your end step, exile the top card of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. Wild Magic Sorcerer has Cascade for when you play things from exile. I wonder what lets you play things from exile. And it also has Pact Boon. Whenever you play a card from exile, you create a treasure token. So you have the Wild Magic Sorcerer. So, sorry, you have Prosper. You exile the card from the top of your library, and you play it from exile. You cascade, you get a treasure, and with the Zorn on the field, you get 2 treasures instead. The Grim Hireling is out there smacking around people, getting some extra tokens, treasure tokens out there, and again, the Zorn is going to give you some extra. Prosper Tomebound, very interesting one. Glad to add it to my collection and be able to use it. This is another one which only going to have 4 because the bonus sheet is going to be you find some prisoners. So these guys locked up somehow, and you've got a choice to make. 1 in a red instant. Choose 1. Break their chains to destroy target artifact. Get rid of something that's having a little bit of trouble. Or to make this really synergistic, interrogate them. Exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose one of them until the end of your next turn. You may play that card and may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So another thing that you're casting from exile to create a treasure token, to get Cascade, to do all of the fun things that you've got. Yeah, another very synergistic one with some very interesting cards to go along with it. I'm not going to lie when I say I did pick the order I did these because I did them. These last 3 are definitely some of the best in my opinion there. Next up, we've got Black Lights and Dark Dungeons with another titular card that a lot of people like to be able to look for a deck because, again, it is also powerful. Dark Illuminations, courtesy of Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments. Yes, yes, yes. We've got some interesting little ones in this one as well. And after this, we got one more, and we're all set with this secret lair. And oh my goodness, some of these Dungeons and Dragons ones ends up coming with some cards that are very nifty. All right, starting off, we've got a little bit of Seasoned Dungeoneer. Ooh, now it's really interesting because it's spooky black, and very dim, not dim. It looks black, but it's a white card. It's 3 and a white. But it makes sense of, a seasoned dungeoneer going into a dungeon, going into a castle, going into a place where there's a lot of death and destruction and decay. Like, yeah, it's going to be dark and dank and deadly. So the environment makes sense. So 3 and a white for a 3/4 human warrior with when this creature ETBs, you take the initiative. Oh boy, the initiative, the Undercity. When you attack, target attacking cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard gains protection from creatures until end of turn, and it explores. Very, very nice, doing a little bit of exploration, looking at the top card of your deck, if I remember that correctly. No, that's something else. Explorers is just, I think you go the next room in your dungeon, which is also good. You just get an extra effect there, and then protection from creatures, it just makes it basically unblockable for the turn. There, you can make this unblockable if you want. Just a nifty little one where you're just advancing your dungeon state and then also getting in for some free damage. Yeah, why not? I'll certainly take that. Plus, the artwork on these are just great. Look at that. Next up, we've got the good old Displacer Kitten. Ooh. Another one where you know, very, very dark colorings on it there, but it is a blue card. 3 and a blue for a 2/2 cat beast with avoidance. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Good little blink effect there, so you're just like, I want to save one of my creatures, cast an instant spell, and then you're just like, whoops, you know, like they're gone. You know, your targeted spell doesn't really do anything. Save itself, you know, it's just a nice little one for a little bit of ETB triggers, or try to save something from a, you know, a targeted spell or whatnot. Very, very popular card, one that people want. So again, good for the collection. Up next, we've got a little bit of Tortured Existence. Ooh. I mean, they're a skeleton already, so, I mean, they're probably gotten undead, and you've got a little bit of a rack with some spikes on it. You know, flail on top of a halberd, like, yikes. Snake wrapping around and coiling in. It's got screws in his head. Yeah, it's a Tortured Existence. 1 black for an enchantment with pay a black and discard a creature card to return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Nice little one for discarding cards, bringing some stuff back. I've got some ideas of being able to put this into some of my decks there, so I'm glad to get some really nice copies of these. And again, great artwork. Next up, we've got Sephiroth of the Hidden Ways. It took me a while. I couldn't figure out what that last word was. But yeah, Sephiroth of the Hidden Ways. Ooh, it's got a lot of galaxies and, you know, celestial bodies in the background there. I actually kind of dig the background more than Sephiroth herself. Artist did really good on those backgrounds. I like the crow too. I wonder why. Name of channel. 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black. I wonder what the colors of those other ones were. For a 2/3 legendary human wizard with whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, venture into the dungeon. This ability only triggers once each turn. Well, you can put them into your graveyard with Tortured Existence for 1 black mana. So you can go even further in with that. And create undead whenever you complete a dungeon. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you could just continuously do Tortured Existence, throw something out, bring something back for just 1 black on everybody's turn, since you can play it as an instant speed thing, and venture further into dungeon, get more effects of that. And then when you complete the dungeon, you get those effects there of just bringing something back. Yeah, it's a very nifty one there. And I guess you could use Displace or get Kitten if you wanted to flash, to like remove Sephiroth, bring her back in, and because it's a new version of her, you could use this effect again for Tortured Existence. So yeah, you know, being able to get multiple things back is really, really nice. And our bonus sheet card is going to be Dungeon Delver. A little bit of a Goblino there. This one is going to be a background, though. So like we were talking about with Gale and Shadowheart, who you can choose the backgrounds for, this is potential one. 1 in a blue for a legendary enchantment background. Commander creatures you own have room abilities of dungeons you own trigger an additional time. Very, very good for this deck that's looking to trigger, you know, go through the dungeon really quickly and get a lot of those triggers again. So hell yeah, you know, like I would definitely play that in this sort of deck. It makes a whole lot of sense. Glad to get some more Displacer Kittens. I've gotten a whole ton of those. And if possible, I plan to get a whole lot more of them, you know, as I'm able to. And lastly, we are going to get the final one here. Another really, really good one, Whispers in Candlekeep. I think that this is another really, really good one based off of the cards that were shown. Seek beyond the emerald door. And I mean, we've got some sort of emerald dragon, it looks like, right on the front there. So kind of makes sense. I believe I remember which dragon that's supposed to be. And if it is that one, then I think that we're going to be sitting pretty for that one as well. Now, we had talked about this one before. Our first card is going to be Counter Spell. And it's a very interesting one. We've got some elvish man throwing up a shield to stop some books that are forming teeth out of their pages to attack him. Now that would be a terrible paper cut there. Just paper cuts all along your arms, your body, your legs, your face. Yikes. But this is the good old classic 2 blue for an instant just to counter target spell. Woe betide the avowed, unready to lay down the law with a book. Yep. And it looks like there's actually again, it's hard to sometimes see under here in the beneath that, but I can see it in here in the foil one a bit better. There's a bunch of books on the ground from when he's cast spells, probably disenchanted whatever sorcery was animating them, such as this. But yeah, another one with really, really good artwork there. Next up, we've got a little bit of Dragonborn Champion. Again, I don't think this has been printed all that many times outside of the Commander deck that it came in. 2 a green and a red for a 5/3 Dragon Warrior with Trample. So getting through a little bit of stuff, nice. Whenever a source you control deals 5 or more damage to a player, you draw a card. This creature with 5 attack, I wonder if it could deal 5 damage. So I think that this would also go well with that Cloud deck, like the Precon deck, because I think it deals a lot with dealing like things of 7. So if you're able to deal 7 damage, you know, this saying 5 or more, 7 is more than 5, you get to draw your card. Yeah, that's a nice little one there. And it looks like maybe this is the guy himself who is animating the books because we see them flying up and around. Makes sense. Once I sought to be remembered by my people, now I seek to rescue my people's memory. And, okay, I'll have to see if it's the next one. I think it might be. But this is another really good one itself. Again, I don't think has really been printed outside of the Commander deck that it came in. But a really, really good one that I have a couple of copies of because they were in the Commander deck slot for when I was opening up the collector boxes. Cloth, Unrivaled Ancient, 5, a red and a green for a 4/4 legendary dragon with flying and haste. That's a little bit underpowered, right? A 4/4 flying haster for 7, that sounds like old magic. Well, whenever Cloth attacks, you add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the total power of attacking creatures. Spend this mana only to cast spells, and until the end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. That's a lot of mana ramp there. Extra mana for the total power. Oh my goodness there. That's a lot. And really, really nice artwork, you know, high above the candle keep there. Maybe that was the Reliquary Tower artwork, if I am remembering correctly. But yeah, always good to get more cloths. And I believe this is the one that I'm looking for there. And it is. It's the green Emerald Dragon, Miram the Sentinel Worm, one that people detest because of how good it is sometimes. 3, a green, a blue, and a red for a 6/6 legendary dragon spirit with flying and ward 2. Hard to get rid of because it's got that ward 2. Whenever another non-token dragon you control ETBs, you create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary. So you get Miram Sentinel Worm out, 6 cost. Next turn for the 7 cost, you cast Cloth, who has haste. Well, Cloth, because of this, you get a token that's a copy of it that's not legendary, so both of them can be out on the field. You attack in with things. 8 damage with Cloth, 6 with Miram. Well, you're adding 14 mana. And if you're playing dragons, you get extra ones. Miram is one that people don't like because it gives too much value sometimes, and how can you hate value? I'm going to be playing Miram, so get ready to get eaten by a dragon, and our final card is going to be Scaled Nurturer. 1 and a green, 0/2 Dragon Druid, taps to add 1 green. When you spend this mana to cast a dragon creature spell, you gain 2 life. That's what we're doing. We're getting this guy out early so we can cast Miram earlier, get our more dragons earlier, gaining life, and just beating people down with all of our big scaly friends there. So how could you say no to that? We're going to decimate these players with our dragons, with our dungeons, with our displacer kittens, and our prosper tomebounds. We're going to destroy them with our treasures as well. All in all, I think that this was a very, very nice set. I will say completely honestly, I don't know all that much about Gale. From the stuff that I do know, I don't much care for his character. I think his Secret Lair was also the weakest, and everything else was really nice. Whoops, that one flew off around there. Obviously, lands are not going to retain super huge amounts of value with these Secret Lairs, but I like having the different artworks because they look really cool. But other than that, I think that these were some nice Secret Lairs. Some of them, though, pretty much this one, and maybe a little bit of this one as well, were mostly made viable based off of one card that was in it. But hey, all in all, I think that there was some amazing artwork here, really good for the collection. I'll be able to use plenty of these cards in decks that I have planned to make or already have made and just want to upgrade it. So thanks for joining me on this one. I look forward to coming back on some new ones in the future. We've got some old retro boxes that we're opening up. And by retro, I just mean ones that are not kind of like in the current rotation there. So look forward to some of those and some other fun things that we have, as we've got Secrets of Strixhaven coming out, and then kind of a big month where there's nothing really new coming out. So we'll see what comes out afterwards there with, Hobbit and Marvel and whatnot. But some of the other ones that I just have planned that we're going to have a little bit of fun, delve into things that aren't necessarily new. So look forward to those. Have a good afternoon, evening, or night. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.